Youth sport is $1 billion industry. Athletic development plays a significant role in that. I'm your host, Nathan Parnham, athletic development coach and author of The Sporting Parent. Here, I'll share my thoughts on youth athletic development. Welcome to The Get Down, a podcast for parents, coaches, and schools involved in the youth sporting landscape to help set your athletes or programs up for success. This guest episode is brought to you by GymAware. I can proudly say I've used their gear regularly over the years and can vouch that it's the gold standard brand in VBT for a reason. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, there are 3 things I simply don't waver from in the use of technology in my programs. 1, they need to be tried and tested. In other words, supported by research. This has been done so for over 22 years with GymAware. 2, affordability. We're all on limited budgets and GymAware by far exceeds any expectation and delivery compared to other tech companies on the market. And the 3rd and final, most important, is it needs to serve multiple purposes within the gym setting and programming opportunities, which combining either the GymAware or their Flex alternative, it passes with flying colours. So if you're interested, reach out to the guys at GymAware through info@gymaware.com. Mention the Get Down podcast and you might score yourself a little discount or free shipping on your next order. I'd like to start this episode by giving a huge shout out to our platinum sponsor, Play. If there is one brand synonymous with inspiring human performance, Play would be it. Anyone who has seen their world-class fit-outs and equipment line know they are the pinnacle. From their Achieve rubber to Attack turf, your flooring becomes uncompromised. Throw in there the longevity and resilience of their Icon X racks. This crew are the real deal, standing by their products. From project management down to fit-out and equipment solutions, jump over to play.us or check them out on social media to learn more, including in our show notes for further information. So the final guest speaker is going to be an absolute cracker of the Get Down podcast. So this individual to my side has made a monumental impact on the field of long-term athlete development and the development pathways for coaches as a whole. He's currently the head of talent identification and athlete development at Elite Sport UAE, and is the co-founder and director of the LTAD Network, who do huge things for our industry moving forward. Has held multiple roles in talent identification at the renowned Aspire Academy, among others, and is currently in Australia for the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association annual conference, which he's just delivered a cracking presentation on interpreting performance in youth track and field. So it's an absolute pleasure to introduce our final guest of the Get Down podcast, Mr. James Baker. Welcome.
Thank you. We're very flattered by the introduction, but it's awesome to be here, and what a great opportunity to do a live podcast.
Yeah, it's cool. Cool. Appreciate it, mate. So we're going to get straight into this because I know a lot of the listeners are keen to tap into your actual experience when it comes to the youth. So what are the top 3 things you see is evolving with this generation of the athletes coming through? So that's different to what perhaps, say, you or I did or experienced coming through.
I think if we think of the athlete at the center, I think maybe we'd agree that some are coming through with lower levels of like physical or movement literacy in terms of what they get exposed to at a younger age. I think that's a big thing. I know from like the time I spent working in PE, the teachers that I worked with were like, kids don't move how they used to move. And you know, that's a reflection of what they're doing in terms of day-to-day sat more watching Netflix or playing PlayStation or whatever it is, right? So yeah. I think that's a big area. I think, you know, the kids coming through now also have far more choice than we did in terms of things to occupy their spare time.
Yeah.
So sport is now competing against esports. It's competing against a whole host of more recreational activities. You think, I never had the option to stand up paddleboard or kayak or all those things. So I think our traditional sports are competing with those things now to a greater extent. And, there's kids who just like to move. Like my middle son loves parkour.
Yeah.
He's not drawn to competitive sport at all, but loves
something
to
that
move.
wasn't even on the radar for kids, right?
Exactly. So, I think their options are very different in that sense. In terms of a third one, I think what kids have that's probably different to when I think we're a similar age.
Yeah. 40, I'm 43, you're 41.
Yeah. So, I mean,
not too old, mate.
Yeah, no, we're young dogs in the grand scheme of things. I think the other thing now is the professionalism that surrounds that development pathway. If they're into their sport and they want to kick on with their sport, people with experience like you, me, and lots of others that are in this development space, there weren't people with that specialist skill set. If you rewind 20 years ago, and I spoke to I was very much into rugby union, like my late teens, early 20s, and really wanted to make a crack of it, but really didn't know what to do. And that was actually what drove me down the strength and conditioning path, was because I felt like I'd missed out on certain things and I wanted to help other people like not miss the opportunities in the same way. And I think I spoke to like one of my PE teachers who I worked with years later at the school where I set up the LTAD program. And he said, you probably came through 5 or 6 years too late. The game had just gone professional. We didn't really know what we were doing. So I think now, you think of the fantastic work that goes on in those development spaces, particularly if you're in an academy system. I think those opportunities now are wonderful for kids if they can get them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spot on. And I think that I love it because you've highlighted like a multifaceted approach to it of various things, and the bandwidth is huge, and you're absolutely right. So if there's individuals coming through, there's that I wouldn't call it specialized training. It's not that. It's more to do with them actually knowing how to train and at what age. So that's really cool. So I suppose the next thing that I'm interested in, and this is where you've, completely dominated the space, is so when it comes to talent identification, it's been a hot topic of a lot of conjecture over the last couple of decades, I suppose you could say. There's often two sides of the fence for those for it or those against it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'll even go as far as to say that some sports swear by it and others just don't.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on it, given your experience in the papers and your experience in the industry?
I think I listened to a talk the other day, and it was we did some talks on TID in the UAE, and one of the professors who described an overview of TID said there's very much two schools of thought around it. And one is very much around identifying people with the physiological capabilities to excel in sports. And I think this is more probably the old way of TID that we've seen over the last couple of decades, this monodisciplinary, find an elite athlete, turn them into something, at an elite level, which is, I can see how that it's flawed in some ways and why people would not necessarily agree with that. I mean, one, doing those kind of scouts, what's the right term for it? Scanning, entire large populations and things, and you're going to find people, and it's what really is in the literature now. Well, if you look at some of the TID literature as talent detection, we're going out and finding people that aren't in the sport and trying to move them to a sport. Yeah. And that relies,
as opposed to the opposite side being that they're actually interested in it, they're playing the sport. And
talent identification would be identifying people who are already involved in the sport with potential to go to a higher level.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, if we think about it, think of TID as the talent detection piece, like getting out and just scouring, but that depends on a lot of things. Like, you need quality coaches and programs to move those people to make them love the sport. Whereas I think the talent ID side, if you take it on the other end, it's like, well, they already like the sport enough to be playing it. Yeah. Can we wrap some more support around them and see if they can get there? And I think that's probably, and then that's the other school of thought, is that TID is a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary thing, like I presented, where we look at current performance, technical ability, tactical ability, physical capability, social support for being an athlete, psychological characteristics that may predetermine that they could be more or less successful. But it's also viewing all of those things as developable, not as just an innate genetic thing. So I think that's the way I tend to look at it is we're all doing TID to some extent. If we're selecting a high school football team or a rugby team, we're identifying the people that we think have the chance to do well and be successful for the team, so we're all doing it on some level. But if we're only making judgments in one or two of those domains, then I think that's where it goes wrong. So I think if more people saw TID in that way, I think, and took that holistic approach to selection and identification, I don't think people would have the same view of it.
Yeah.
But I also, the other thing I think that's probably been wrong with TID over the years, I think, is that it's in certain settings where I've been, it's been a very transactional thing where you come and you do a TID test with us and you do some physical testing. We sit on all the data. We decide whether you're going to be in or out. And then you never hear from us again, or you do and you get invited to a program.
Yeah.
So we tried to flip that a bit with what we've done in the UAE so far and say, right, well, if you're coming with us, you're going to learn something through that process as well. And I think if you approach TID in that way as it's a chance for you to learn something about yourself, we're going to tell you about your tests and what you did and where you can get better. But also we're going to use the opportunity to teach you about how to warm up, some nutrition, some psychology. And even if you're not successful, we're going to give you things to go away and be able to make yourself more successful.
Yeah.
So I think when you approach it that way, rather than we're just going to take the data, decide if you're any good, fire you off and keep the people we want.
Made it or you haven't.
Yeah.
And
then I think layering in the things that I've talked about today in the presentation around maturity status to give you a better perspective on people, whether they're early or late developing, and then shaping processes and programs that enable you to keep more people in the pathways.
Yeah.
So like one of the things we did at Aspire was it used to be full-time or not. And then we said, well, can we have a part-time program for these kids that we're not sure about? We're selecting at 11 years old. If they got some more coaching and a little bit of S&C, they might kick on over the next 12 months or so.
Yeah.
But if we deselect them now and that message says you're not good enough, it's very different to saying we're just not sure yet. We think you've got potential. We can't select everyone, but we're happy to support you in this way on a part-time basis.
Yeah.
I think then you've got a very different mindset and environment around TID.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. And I suppose at the end of the day, the value and let's call it the youth athlete's interpretation of physical activity is a little bit more welcomed in that space too, as opposed to a transactional one. You've either made it or you've failed, for lack of a better term.
And how many kids just completely switch off from sport then because they think I'm not good? Because you or I who they may perceive based on the badge we wear on our chest, or the role, our title, that might feel like that we really know, and we're telling them we don't think they're going to be an elite athlete. In some cases, these football academies are doing that. Selection processes at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old as a first sort of scouting level. So I think that would be my sort of take on that at the moment. Yeah, from where my head's at.
No, that's great. It's really cool insights. And I suppose so. If someone's been earmarked early to be, let's call it, talented, then be it from a skill perspective or their physical attributes and the performance side of it. And you've covered a lot of this in your presentation this morning, which you did a great job of. What are some things that you feel those around them, from their development coaches to families, can do to keep them in the sport to eventually see what?
I think we've got to do as good a job as possible of trying to help people, especially when we're dealing with the youth athletes, to keep a perspective on where they're at in the grand scheme of things. And I think it's very quickly parents, athletes, coaches, they see the guy, the early talent, and it's like, we're all in. We think, he's going to be the next big thing or she's going to be the next big thing. And it's like, if you really zoom out and put it in perspective, some of those kids are still just competing at a school level. They've not even broke out of county or regional or national level yet. And it's like, you've got to, I think having that context on it is really important as a group. Yeah. And I think having some of the things that we talked about measuring today, like maturity status, relative age, training age, some of these kids that we see that are more talented from a skills perspective have just been doing the sport for longer. Yeah. Or they've had access to coaching at a higher level or a better coach than someone else. And it's like, so keeping all those things in perspective and using all those disciplines that we've just talked about to kind of go, right, well, we've got this early talent in this area, so they're really skillful. What about from a physical perspective? Yeah. Because at some point that physical element might be the rate limiter or the psychological element or the nutrition habits. So it's like, look, when you've got one of those early talents, keep performance in context. Where are they really? And if we're talking about someone becoming an elite performer, what does that take? If we take the examples from athletics. So we get asked all the time, is this kid any good? Well, let's look at him in relation to what we know World Under-20 qualifying is and elite is. He's miles off at the moment, but he's a good athlete for his age group. Let's keep him in the system and see how he goes. But he's got a long way to go. And I think managing the messaging around that and not getting too carried away is important. And I think first and foremost, like as coaches, what can we do to keep them in? Create great coaching environments. Create enjoyable environments that the kids want to be part of and want to keep coming back to. So as coaches, we need to invest in ourselves, in our education. The people that are sat here at this conference this weekend are people that are doing that. And I think having that from a coaching perspective, an S&C perspective, that's what we have to do. Keep kids wanting to come back to sport and not choose one of those other distractions that is out there to them where they are maybe getting that. And I think, from some of those distractions that we talk about, like video games, actually as coaches and people who work with youth, we can learn a lot from them. If you look at how video games are designed with incremental challenges and learning, and gamification of tasks and leveling up, we can apply that to our coaching in different ways.
That's right.
And I think, so those would probably be the things that I would think about to keep people in.
Okay. Because it's interesting, isn't it? Like you've got almost when it comes to their passion for it, is it really the child's passion is deemed to be talented? Or is it the child's or the youth's desire to succeed? Is it their craving attention from their parents? Is it the parental expectation because they're passionate about a particular sport, be it football or rugby league, rugby union? Or is it their ticket out? So I suppose that there's a variety of different things that come with it. And that's why I find it interesting when you say it's almost like taking a bird's eye view and keeping it in perspective. That's where it's really important for parents to understand, well, is it actually me getting carried away with this because I'm passionate about it? Or is it the child because my unconditional love is trying to make them succeed in it? And it's a hard one, right? Because I don't think every parent wants their kid to succeed. It just depends on what that actually looks like in your family.
But we know if kids are going to go on and succeed at the highest level, in most cases, there needs to be some intrinsic drive to do that, doesn't there? And how many kids have you seen that are pushed so hard by parents that by 15 or 16 are checked out? And they're like, they're into something else. I actually created something in like a matrix and called it the support motivation matrix. And it was support on the y-axis, motivation on the x-axis. And we came up with 9 quadrants that describe, is it the parents' motivation is high and the athlete's motivation is low? Are both high, which is probably the optimal scenario? Supportive parents, intrinsically motivated athlete, or there's... I
love that. Is that cool. Okay, so I'll put it in the show notes too if anyone is interested.
And then in the bottom right corner was a highly motivated athlete with low support from parents for a sporting career. And then in the bottom left corner is low on both fronts. And then in between, it's like an extrinsically motivated athlete is probably somewhere in between those two things because, they're motivated by social recognition, financial rewards, fame, or something like that, not necessarily the love of the sport.
And the intrinsic side of it that you're talking about.
That matrix was something that I thought about in terms of, I've spent a lot of time thinking behind my desk in the last 18 months as we started to get programs up together, but it was something I thought about in terms of the psychological characteristics for successful young athletes. It was around like that motivation piece to go, well, what is the quality of the motivation, level of support, and look at that, because I think it's an important area to consider if someone's going to kick on.
No, I love it. That's unreal. So I suppose, you've created the LTAD network. So I'm sure many of your listeners are fully aware of it. If you're not, just Google it, LTAD Network. We'll put it in the show notes as well.
We'll do a code so you can put it out for the listeners and people can get in for a month or something like that.
Perfect. Unreal. Love it. That'd be unreal. So I suppose in creating the LTAD network, it's been phenomenal, right, for our industry. Like, it's unquestionable, and all the professionals that have been involved with it. So as you know, our industry has evolved massively over the last decade or so. Where do you see the space of the development pathway and the direction it's heading from a coach, a club, or an industry standpoint? What's your future vision, I suppose, when it comes to the development pathway?
I think there's probably a few ways we could look at this. I think from a broad pathway perspective, I think we've got more people now seeing youth athletic development as a business opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think
I love it. Yeah.
Risk comes with that, because there are now people trying to cash in on an area,
right?
make a
sustainable living.
make a sustainable living with it. But do they have the expertise and understanding and experience to do that? Now, a lot of people that are operating at a really high level, I think of people like yourself, Rob Anderson, running his own private program.
Shout out to Rob Anderson.
Yeah, Howard Green. Like, these are guys that have applied their trade. You've done it in professional sport, you've done it in youth sport. And there's people that are now coming out of personal training backgrounds and setting up youth programs without the same depth of experience of working with kids. And, do they understand pedagogical principles? How do kids learn? Do they have
the
this
psychosocial development that comes with it? It's
the
not
growth
just the athletic
growth and maturation. What's appropriate at what stage? Do they understand the literature that's behind it in terms of youth physical development models and LTAD models? Are they thinking about those things, or are they just creating a product that they know at the moment is pretty hot and they can sell? And I think, the role of, I think it's amazing, the stream of the youth series that you've got here at ASCA, I think is an amazing stream. It's how do we get that then to the masses now that are working in other areas?
Yeah.
I know the UKSCA's Strength and Conditioning Trainer Award is targeting people who are either from PE backgrounds or coaching backgrounds, and there's an element of how do you work with youth in that.
Yeah.
So I think more that can be done by governing bodies that drives that, but also I think, as parents question people about, you should be going to someone really who's an accredited specialist in strength and conditioning, whether that's ASCA or UKSCA.
And a huge shout out to the UKSCA, because they're, along with the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association and the NSCA for that matter, they've all got their own position stand on what that actually looks like. So if you're a parent listening to this, then those are at the front. They're saved on my desktop to give you an example, because they're the number one resource that people go to if you're a parent and you're wondering, where am I meant to invest? Money doesn't grow on trees, so they say, but for a lot of parents, then it's a case of going, okay, well, how can I upskill myself to know the direction that I'm heading, so that for lack of a better term, the snake or salesman doesn't come out and try and flog you the latest and greatest. Wow. And there's some good resources as well.
I think you touched on it in one of your videos, and I've said this as well to people. Parents are now thrust into this position of high performance manager with no previous experience or qualification, and they've got the prized possession of their child.
Yeah.
That
plus
they're
the
looking
unconditional love in there as well.
Yeah. So I think, helping parents to understand, that's probably an area for us to look at is how do we get information in a way now that's digestible and understandable for parents in these spaces? And I know University of Bath are doing some great work at the moment, that developing child course that they put out that people can access. If it's a teacher listening to this, I can send the resource for that, and that's available for free up till the end of the year. University of Bath.
That's hot off the press as well. That's only come out in the last couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah, they've literally just launched it. So, I mean, we can pursuing those kind of things. I think in terms of what's going on in development pathways, moving away from sort of that youth fitness business area. I think, we've got people. I think it's more now about, how do we keep applying this and iterating our processes to get better and better? And how do we make, we're, like we say, we're moving systems on, we're measuring the things that matter, like growth and maturation and tracking relative age and those things. Well, how do we make that more meaningful and embedded within our processes? How do we make sure we're making the right training decisions? And I think, there's some fantastic work that's being done in Premier League academies, and we've definitely seen an evolution through the LTAD network. If you look back to some of the work that was going on in the early days when we started up, 2015, the level of work that's going on now in the youth space, I think we're miles on.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just climbing at a rapid rate, right? Which is actually really cool, because not only is it good for the youth coming through and hopefully their opportunity for success, but it's also really cool for guys like us who are just generally passionate about coaching, and particularly in this particular lane. So it's really cool for coaches to have various avenues to go through. So you touched on something which I want to expand a little bit on, is where do you see schools, clubs, academies can invest resources for the best outcome in the development setting? So we know that the development setting is the most under-resourced place. Some clubs do it better than others, but given that and the financial side of the limitations, including that as the resources, so schools, clubs, and academies, where do you think they can invest their resources to put their best foot forward?
I think of it as 4 Ps.
Okay, this is cool.
People. And I think this is the number one in the youth space.
Yeah.
You need to invest in people. You need to, if you can, you pay them handsomely to keep the best people in the youth setting, or you pay to develop those people if they're not there yet, and you get them the support that they need to deliver the best programs for the kids. I think the second P is places,
Yeah.
programs, and processes.
Okay.
You need the people.
Yep.
You need good facilities and places, but you just need a space. A place
sure.
will also do, particularly in the youth setting. You give me an open space, I'll run you a great athlete development program with next to no equipment.
Yeah, and that's where I
that.
think that people make the mistake, right? Because they go, oh, I want this sexy facility, but they don't realize that you can actually create something out of nothing.
Yeah.
So
bodyweight strength exercises, some jumping and some sprinting at the beginning of a youth sports session in the space that you've got available, some change of direction, some tag games, and you've got the cornerstones of a great youth athletic development program straight away without, a fancy facility. Obviously, if there's going to come to a point where you do need to invest in some better equipment to keep those physical qualities progressing, we know you can only get so strong with body weight.
yeah,
You're going to need to have a gym that you can train in. But so again, I think having a place to train in a space is really important. But if you got the first P right in terms of the people with experience and the right knowledge and skill sets, they will make do with very little. And that's where I think that's the most important one. And then when you combine those two things, you've got your programs.
Yeah.
And you set up the programs from experienced practitioners in good places.
Yeah.
You develop your programs, you review your programs. Like Glenn Stewart was saying, you reflect on your programs, what's working with these groups. We keep getting better, and then you refine your processes along the way. So I think if you think of those and processes and protocols, maybe around things like what are the things that you measure that matter?
Yeah.
How do we do that reliably? How do we do that? And so I think if you cover those 4 Ps as a youth sport organization, or any organization probably, but I think if you focus on those things and you evaluate what you're doing at the moment in those areas, do our people have the right qualifications and experience? And if they don't, can we help them get there?
Yeah.
I think that would be the things for me.
Very cool. Okay. So I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious of where we are, and everyone's done a great job here of being able to get through this. I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Okay.
So every guest episode, we have a power round, and there's going to be 3 words that I'm going to throw at you. So James hasn't had an insight of what this actually looks like.
My jet lag brain might not be able to...
Late last night is... So the 3 words, I'll tell you, each individual one, you've got one word or a brief sentence of what it actually means to you.
Yeah.
The first word, or conjunction of words, would be long-term athlete development.
For me, I think of it, LTAD, if I think of it as a program, it should be a progressive curriculum that transports a development athlete towards a higher or elite level over time.
Love it. Technology.
Important, but know its place.
And the final one to wrap it up is talent.
Talent. Just don't get carried away with early talent, and keep as much talent in the pipeline as you possibly can.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, absolute pleasure, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for organising, and great to sit down and be able to have that chat. Awesome.
Unreal. Thanks very much, James Baker, absolute legend in the field, and the final guest episode of the Get Down podcast.
1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you to GymAware, the #1 velocity-based training company on the market, for bringing you the guest episodes. Don't forget to check out their Flex devices with the link in the show notes, and take advantage of the opportunity exclusive to the Get Down listeners, being 5% off Flex devices using the code GETDOWN5, being the number 5 at checkout. A big thanks once again to our platinum sponsor, the team at Play, for sponsoring the Get Down podcast. Be sure to visit play.us or our show notes for further information.